Green Fruit, Chapter 10. Dayada Karin sat at a desk. How could she possibly not be crushed by sitting at this particular desk? She wasn't sure, but she'd try. She had her own ship and crew. No, she didn't. Now she had a desk. It wasn't a cell, but it was cell-adjacent. She was now part of the detail tasked with guarding Commander Shepard. She closed her eyes and sighed at the irony heaped around her. Well, there was plenty of space around her to hold it. Nobody wanted to get close enough to step in it. The difference between her and Commander Shepard was that he might get out. She bet she'd be at this desk for a long time. Cell adjacent. It was a hell of a cell. A private home with sudden and shiny additions built. She could hear power tools still whirring. She was one of the theoretically mild-mannered desk jockeys included at the entrances. She was at the front, in the foyer. It was definitely a foyer and not a hallway. Mirrored. She caught sight of herself in her Alliance gold-trimmed dress blues. Her skin did well with the gold, but not necessarily the blue. She had a high forehead, wide and round hazel eyes, and slightly more green than olive skin that made double takes and squints standard. Brown hair in a neat and even bun. Regulation. She looked away and down, finding the desk safer to consider. Her desk was mighty nice, no doubt. Matched the shine of the place. Whoever put her here, she applauded their ability to consign her to metaphoric hell, complete with voluntary attempted tormentors. Coombs, who was bitter at being at his own desk, had said, "Too bad Shepard's in love with his wife, Karin. You can't fuck your way out of this one. Who knows, though? You're really good at getting fucked." He wasn't wrong about the getting fucked part. She couldn't even be angry at Coombs, whose IQ could only rise to 69 metaphorically. He was crude and couldn't do anything else. She felt sorry for him. She'd keep to her desk. Maybe name it the SSV Dead End. Maybe she was picked because she looked pretty sitting here. Coombs was good-looking, too. No eyesores here. No doubt whoever sat here after her would also look good and be able to make the dutiful and entirely unnecessary checkmark required in case someone entered or exited. They didn't really need personnel here. The only meaningful biometrics and surveillance were electronic. When it was someone else's turn at the desk, she and her irony could try to get some sleep. Which was about as likely as fucking Commander Shepard. Or Coombs. She allowed herself a brief fantasy of leaving the Alliance, finding some corner on some world where she could sit at a desk that wasn't inherently poisoned. But she couldn't really sustain that thought, and she didn't think that place really existed. Coombs was bad, but he couldn't really help being who he was. She couldn't even really say she didn't belong in metaphoric, sleek hell. But there were still Reapers and Collectors, and eventually she'd be off this desk one way or the other. One good Reaper invasion, and this was all over. Something to look forward to. She focused on maintaining her pacific expression and not fidgeting physically or existentially. She'd had a briefing on authorized visitors and the theoretically incarcerated. Commander Shepard. She knew him on sight. Who didn't? Karin Chakwas, his wife. Dr. Chakwas owned a list of medical degrees and accomplishments that made Deyada jealous. She imagined an alternative life path, not military but scientific, with the opportunities this woman had forged for herself. Okay, she had enough to wallow in, no need to pile it on. She was losing all the superiority she'd gained from comparing herself to Coombs. That was a shame, because it had been keeping her going. They had a son. Autistic, adopted. David Archer. 2 Drell guests, father and son. Everyone other than Commander Shepard had the right to come and go without being stopped, and she wondered what exactly the protocol would be for the moment when Commander Shepard wanted to leave with them, and she was faced with 5 people that outranked her, mentally, physically, and socially, whose combined military experience and Normandy-adjacent lives made the SSV dead end potentially veer more toward being named SSV Darwin Award. Not that her genetics were something Darwin had imagined. It was not going to be the SSV self-pity. She was alive. She had a desk. She was not incarcerated. She was not indoctrinated. Those were her patches of ground, and she would defend them. If her main fights right now were with boredom and irrelevance, she could bear up under that in a temperature-controlled environment. The power tool stopped creating productive noise pollution, and it wasn't long before a shuttle landed with people that could mock her relevance in comparison if she let that happen. She tried to gain some perspective. Commander Shepard had been dead once. He hadn't even had a desk at the time. They came in, not one by one, but Shepard, Chakwas, and Archer, then Thane and Kolyat Krios. Having expected to be the most impressed with Commander Shepard, she was disturbed to discover that through the laughter and general sense of homecoming and family, despite the fact that this was a prison, Thane Krios moved in a way that made her grateful there was a desk and distance between them, as her scalp tightened and her skull seemed to reverberate as though someone had used her spine as a bell pull. She smiled at them. She did not think they saw her, and she hoped it stayed that way. It did not stay that way. A few days passed with them and their belongings coming and going. She was getting used to not being seen. It was, in fact, a relief. Dr. Chakwas emerged from the prowess. Prison palace was too long a phrase and awkward, and although she had plenty of time for 4 syllables, she also had time for whimsy that was just that little bit bitter. Dr. Chakwas approached Deyada with a smile. "Hello. I'm certain you know my name, but what is yours?" "Deyada Karin, ma'am." "Please, call me Karin." "No, ma'am." Dr. Chakwas continued with a smile. "I hate to impose upon your goodwill, but unfortunately I am under lifting restrictions, and my project requires lifting. Would you please?" Dr. Chakwas had at least 3 able-bodied men inside the compound that could all lift for her. Maybe she wasn't on such good terms with her husband as rumored. Deyada knew a few things about heeding rumor. "Of course, ma'am. What can I help with?" Dr. Chakwas led her back to a lab that did, in fact, make her viciously jealous, though she didn't show it. She was directed to reposition some very specific and elegant machinery she'd love to play with. 2 gene sequencers and synthesizers that were probably worth more than the rest of the compound. She'd love to know what Dr. Chakwas was doing, but she did not ask. David sat in a corner of the space, out of the way of any bustle. He was reciting prime numbers in a calm and droning tone, and she was enjoying calculating the next one. She didn't exactly bang down a piece of gear, but there was a stuttering brush of placement on the metal, and David's delivery of the expected number was delayed. Deata said, 102,564. Trying to pick up the rhythm for him and apologize simultaneously. Dr. Chakwas looked to David, looked to her, and Deata looked up, startled out of her admiration for beautiful scientific equipment and beautiful mathematic thoughts. David lifted his head and smiled at Deata, but she felt she'd overstepped all bounds. I'm sorry, ma'am. I did not mean to interrupt him. I was distracted by... This is an extraordinary lab. Deata, being distracted by properly placing and running this equipment through diagnostics and determining the next in a sequence of a 6-digit prime number is not something about which to apologize. Deata thought, news to me. My jealousy's showing and nobody likes a smartass. But she said, that's very kind. David was still looking at her, and she smiled back at him. He resumed his prime number recitation, and she kept her mouth shut. Dr. Chakwas was attempting to cure Capral syndrome. After that had been explained, Deata looked at her, this woman with the opportunity and the means, with this tempting space, this charmed life. Warning bells screamed in the back of her head, on her forehead, in her scalp as she waited and was terrified and elated at hearing what she heard. Deata, is it possible that you could learn the function of this equipment, study Caprals and the specifics of the project, and aid me in formulating palliative measures and potentially a cure? And there it was, relevance and compromise. She'd do just about anything to get into this lab, when she should be at her desk, defending that one honorable patch of ground, going down with her 4-legged ship. David said, 105,683. And she found herself saying, yes, ma'am, in rhythm, shortly after. She was so very fucked. She was so very happy. Jane Krios continued to make her definitively nervous in a physiological way that set her teeth grinding as she resisted the urge to step away. She managed to keep her distance entirely until one day when they were the only ones in the lab, with her under orders to take his blood. He was patiently waiting. She knew Drell had venom, and she was always good with medical precautions anyway, hoping to not insult him by not touching him at all, but determined to not begin hallucinating on the job. Gloves on. She did consider this work to be her job now. Time at her desk was short. She never entered uninvited, but Dr. Chakwas had set a work schedule, and so far, lightning had not in fact struck her for abiding by it. She felt she was now addressing the lightning, as he stated. Dr. Chakwas has grown quite fond of you. I have benefited greatly from that, sir. Please, call me Thane. No, sir. Just as Dr. Chakwas had ignored her rudeness in refusing to use first names, he did the same. This did not set her at ease at all, intensifying the sense of trap. People did not reward rudeness as a rule. My thanks for your efforts on the cure. You're welcome, sir. I admit to some curiosity regarding you, Ms. Karin. She ground her teeth fractionally, but distinctly did not answer and did not invite him to call her Deata. She took blood and skin samples. He waited patiently. She looked at him, ground her teeth for more than a fraction of a second, and then took a sample of her own blood, ran it through the sequencer, and handed him the printout. He didn't look at it, set it aside. Although I appreciate the disclosure, that is not the subject of my curiosity. That would make you unique. Perhaps not. Having access to this machinery and your DNA, I have already run such a scan. Of course you have. What's left to know, or to want to know? Your body is the result of genetic experimentation. What is left to know is whether or not your mind is the same. Of course it's the same. She imagined him calling her Burv, her most common nickname, coined from BPV, the designation for Batarian public vessel. Ms. Karin, you are part Batarian, part human, and part Asari. Although your rescue from the medical facility as a child is documented, that documentation has been tampered with. She grinned. Damned right it had been. His smile wasn't condemning. The information I was able to discover about you is two-dimensional, unlike you as a person. As you have made it impossible for me to learn certain things about you by researching your past, which you have tailored to what you wish to be known, I must ask you. She was angry as hell, wondering if this was the last time she'd be in this room. She loved it here. Tangential association with relevance was about to be yanked from her one more time, and hadn't she known that was how it would work out anyway? She swallowed hard and nodded. Please tell Dr. Chakwas that I enjoyed working with her, and I wish her luck on her project. None of her answers would result in being allowed to stay here, she knew. Ms. Karin, you misunderstand. I do wish to ask you some questions, but I do not believe it will result in your expulsion from this lab. I do not believe Dr. Chakwas would allow it. She needs you. If I may. He stood, and near tears prickled in the corners of her eyes as his hand reached out with her too conflicted to move, the gravity from the shadows of prior humiliations sticking her feet to the ground. He lifted the wig off her head with her scalp wriggling in distress and alarm. She had the human signals of alert on the back of her neck, proto-tentacles that had been surgically buried under thick Batarian skin that had its own danger signals on the surface, including some color change. Even in the places where two more eyes might have once been, who knew? Her genetics and surgical history were monstrous, cross-patched too many ways to analyze, and they were all swimming with atavistic signals from cultures and histories from which she was severed. Her jaw set to stoic endurance of the inevitable. He looked at her without it, and his expression was unreadable as he turned and dropped the wig into a sealed bin intended for incineration of sharps and biological waste. He sat down to face her again. That is better. If you wish another wig, I can provide one that fits, one that suits your coloring and face shape. It was issued to me, sir. I'm certain I'll be issued another as soon as someone sees me like this. Unlikely. Not if Dr. Chakwas objects to its presence in a clean lab. Aren't you going to make sure I don't step into this lab again, considering I'm so inherently unclean? No. Had I wished to remove you, you would have been removed. Sir, I'm a monster. Humans are afraid of me. Batarians think I'm the definition of sullied, and Asari have finally found something worse than a pureblood. Then that is their loss. You happen to be a brilliant monster. Which, from my understanding, is part of the problem. Not from my perspective. Not from Dr. Chakwas's perspective. I have gathered what I could regarding your last mission, why your career ended at that desk. And again I find I must ask you, as those files as well have been altered. And if I lie, I believe you have too much courage and pride to lie. And if the truth isn't good enough, then you must strive to be. And if my Batarian side decides that Commander Shepard needs to die because he wiped out Bahak, then in my assessment, he would already be dead. He wasn't wrong. She looked down at the tile, unaccustomed freedom of light and air on her scalp, figuring the truth could not possibly make things worse than they already were, and that he was right, at least about the pride part. Even if she wasn't too sure what she was feeling was courage so much as desperation. Throughout my career, throughout my life, humans have accused me of being too smart, too perceptive, and they're afraid my Asari heritage makes me psychic. Does it? Yes, not as much as Asari, but more than humans. Then that is a reasonable fear. Damned right it is. They're also afraid my Batarian heritage makes me warlike. Does it? Yes. Effectively so from review of your records. Yeah, I'm good at killing people and beating them up in exhibition. This did not, in fact, help me make friends. So you are beautiful, intelligent, possess skills others cannot hope to attain or compete with, and you are unpredictable and effectively violent when necessary. I can see how that has been a burden. Oddly enough, I wasn't spoken in a voice of condemnation, but with some irony. Considering she was speaking to a Drell whose movements made her want to back away and set her scalp to alarm. She didn't accuse him of sarcasm. I'm not politically adept. Despite excelling in class and testing, people are not my strong suit, and I'm definitely not someone that humans are drawn to, except maybe sexually. So if I didn't sleep with someone, I was a bitch. If I did, I was sleeping my way to the top. Except I really only made it to the middle. Nobody trusted me enough to put me in charge of anything resembling the Normandy or even a slot on a ship like that. I ended up in the supply chain. They can't actually say I can pass a psych eval because I don't match the profile for any of the 3 races I represent. They also don't know what was done to me before I was rescued or if I'm really a spy somehow. They mostly know they don't understand me, can't understand me, and can't risk me being in charge of anything when there are others that are much more easily understood. So I get a supply ship. The SSV Hempstead. We're on a run to resupply an outpost, a yearly medical eval in Terminus for colonies that contract with the Alliance for the service. With collectors and reapers, this is a high-stress and high-risk job now, and the Alliance has turtled up on their support. They know their contracts aren't all that legally binding, and the middleman contractors are profiteering scum who would rather take a final payment when they define it as final, betting on a colony dying out so nobody is left alive to complain. So we're missing some confirmation pings and codes from the Shangri-La outpost. I'm ordered to skip it. Now, I know Shangri-La can't survive having anything skipped. There are kids there. They need vaccinations yearly, or there's this fever that... It's high risk. I get that. I got that. I go. I tell my crew they shouldn't, that I'll make contact. And I do. And the place is indoctrinated. Not just indoctrinated, but wiped out from fever because they missed the last scheduled vaccination health check. I don't want my crew to go up for mutiny charges. I order them to stay behind. I head down. I end up killing the rest of the indoctrinated and fevered individuals that are left out of the colony that was nearly 6,000 strong 2 years ago. Took me a while to find them all. But when there were no more life signs, I called back my crew, turned myself in, turned the vessel over to my second, and once again, nobody has any idea what to do with me, except to not put me in charge. So, desk. There were accusations of sexual misconduct with your superior officer, as well as throughout your career. That's just par for my course, really. My superior officer in this last incident was a lovely man who's about 110 years old and gay and privately supported my actions, but he wasn't going to risk his career by saying so. That doesn't stop anybody from taking a look at me and deciding that's why I'm not in the brig. Miss Karin, I believe you. I face a dilemma, considering you can subvert my care and kill me easily. I believe you do not even need to do that you could, in fact, kill me easily. Not something I am accustomed to encountering. We find ourselves in difficult circumstances. I wish to protect Karin Chakwas and Commander Shepard. It would be difficult to look at you and not imagine you would potentially pose a risk for seduction of either Karin or Shepard, and that is why I ask. I will not place them at risk. In this case, you would, in fact, fail, but you could make their time here unpleasant, and I wish to avoid that as well. My life does not matter particularly, except that my son wishes for me to retain it, and I find it difficult to tell Karin Chakwas no, for many reasons. I am, in fact, a monster. Not one of genetics, but one of surgical interventions and training. There is no reason why the commander and the doctor consider me family. But they do. And they are my family. I believe you are here in this lab in good faith. I also believe that Commander Shepard will reach a day when he is no longer voluntarily under house arrest, in the same way that you reached a day when you would not consider following that particular order from the Alliance. I can offer you a well-paid position as the clearly superior hacker you are. I do not trust the Alliance in general, and then there is the added concern of indoctrination in its ranks. It could be arranged that you become ill, or that some complaint regarding your monstrous pedigree from your high-profile guests removes you from your duty here. Forgive me, sir, But when a terrifying Drell tells me that he can make sure I get sick and wake up with a new secret identity, I assume that new secret identity will reside inside the equivalent of a pine casket. Yes, trust is spare. I do wish to inform you that I admire your integrity and how you have navigated your life. You are intelligent enough to know that due to your disgrace and isolation, you would make a perfect scapegoat should anything go wrong with Commander Shepard's time here. Whoever put you at that desk either envisioned that outcome or works for someone who did. You are either complicit or ignorant. If you are complicit, I will warn you that you are being watched and that seduction or subversion will be opposed. If you are helpless, so am I to stop what is going to happen except to watch and to urge you to do the same and perhaps help me in determining the threat level and direction. I figured out the scapegoat part before I'd gotten to the end of my assignment brief. I'm not complicit, but I am helpless. I would like to prevent a negative outcome, except for those who planned your scapegoating. I don't see how you can. I cannot alone. I need your help. I believe Dr. Chakwas can help. I believe once Commander Shepard takes an interest, he can help. I'm hoping he won't take any interest. In every scenario, it's best that I don't have any access to him at any time. I disagree. He will take an interest, Ms. Karin. How can you be so sure? Because I will make sure he does, just as I suggested to Karin Chakwas that she ask you into her lab. She closed her eyes. Fuck you, sir.